Good afternoon and greetings from North County Dublin, which is in Ireland. I'd just like to extend my thanks to President Mark Downing for inviting me to speak to you today, and also to Elizabeth Blood for her assistance in arranging the online lectures. Hello to all of you who know me, and welcome to everybody else. There's going to be a bit of an extended overview to this manuscript before I start talking about the monuments, because there's a number of issues I wish to deal with regarding Thomas Dingley. You will have read from the introduction what this lecture is about. It will give an account of who Thomas Dingley was, who or what influenced him, and why he came to Ireland. And after this, I will discuss the importance of his manuscript to the study of Irish funerary monuments. Thomas Dingley's work has to be seen within the context of late 17th century England, where there appears to have been a trend amongst large landowners to seek out more about the land that they owned, the people that lived on it, the industry that was on it, and as well as its geographical features, its topography. Some of you might have heard about Moses Pitt and his atlas. Well, it's within this context that his manuscript is to be seen. Dingley's visit is not unlike those of many other English visitors to Ireland, except his is different in that he sketched a lot of what he saw. Other visitors to Ireland who wrote accounts but didn't sketch is Thomas Dent in 1684, who also did a survey of Westmoreland. And you have the bookseller and publisher John Dunton, who visited in 1699. The first slide that I'm showing you here is the first page of Thomas Dingley's Irish manuscript. And I would ask you maybe to keep note of it, because when you're searching for it online, this will be the first page of his manuscript. Most of the illustrations of this front page are on black and white, because a lot of the time, up to fairly recently, only black and white images of the manuscript were available. Dingley also sketched many other things, and I decided to show you what other illustrations you will find in his manuscript. You'll have pictures of houses, churches, scenery, and as well as the only known depiction of a Ringsend coach, which brought passengers from ships where they arrived in Dublin across the Strand into Dublin. For those of you who wish to read up more about Thomas Dingley and look at his manuscript, I've included information from the National Library of Ireland website. They are the owners of the manuscript, and the Irish manuscript is depicted on their, or stored on their site, together with the French journal, which were bound together sometime in the 19th century. So when you go onto the site, you'll see his French journal first, and then if you bring your cursor along, you'll come to the Irish one, and that's why I showed the front page of his Irish manuscript for your attention. The second source that you may wish to want to look at is the Moore Institute Ireland Illustrated, which was launched a few years ago. And again, you can click on that link and it will bring you to the site where you can see a lot of his illustrations, and they're discussed within the context. And there's also information from the actual manuscript, quote from the area of the manuscript where they're found. Another question about Dingley is you will come across is, how do you spell his name? You'll come across it spelled various ways, and sometimes when you're obviously ordering something, you say, am I spelling his name right, and whatever. Well, the thing is, it's spelled both ways, and the man himself spelt it many different ways, and this is a selection of the different ways that he spells his name. My research has shown that the family name is Dingley, Dingley, and I believe Dingley liked using the alternative spelling because some people might have thought he might have been related to the Dingley family of Cropbourne and Worcester, who were far up the social scale ladder than he was, and indeed he visited them and sketched their monuments, and they are in his English journal. I also wanted to let you know that Dingley is responsible for a number of other manuscripts. His first one that we are aware of is his tour of the Low Countries, which is dated around 1670, 1671. This manuscript is in private ownership and hasn't been published. And I don't know if it ever will be, but it's certainly, unfortunately, it's not in public ownership. The second tour that he took is the tour of France, which the National Library here in Ireland has it. That took place around 1675 to 76. Then you have his Irish tour, which is the subject of this lecture. He was here for 12 months between 1680 and 81. This has been published by the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland between 1856 and 1913 in their journal. It is heavily edited, but at least it's out there and that you can read it, and some people might find it easier to read than the original manuscript. Dingley also did a Welsh tour in 1684, and when he had written it up, he presented it to the Beaufort family, and this is now in Babington Hall. It was published twice, in 1864 privately, and then in 1888 it was published by the Welsh Archaeological Society, and it's the 1888 edition that you find predominantly on sale on the various websites. He also is responsible for a manuscript dealing with churches and tombs in England, and is entitled History from Marble, and it was published by the Camden Society in 2 volumes in 1866-7, and the original manuscript to this is in the Bodleian Library. There is another manuscript, no longer in England. It's in the Folger Library, and that's the reference there. It is probably a commonplace book because it contains writings from Dingley and his other friends that he hung around with, and it's very likely a commonplace book. The last source that likely has Dingley's contribution is the Dilwyn parish records for the later part of the 17th century, which are in Hereford Record Office, which contains sketches of some of the churches in the immediate area. Now, I suppose the other question is, before I even continue further, is some of you will be asking, well, who was Dingley? Well, Dingley was from Southampton, from the city. That's where his strong family links. We don't know exactly his date of birth, but we figure he might have been born around the early 1650s. His family had very important connections with the port of Southampton. Both his father and grandfather were controllers. Now, this slide here shows his relationship with the Hopton family of Canon Froome, and this relationship was through his maternal grandmother. His father died in 1660, and it would appear that Dingley and his sister were left as orphans. His grandmother was still alive, and it's very likely that she initiated his move to London to be educated. But before I leave this slide, I have to show you, bring your attention to where the arrow is pointing. There's a chap called Arthur Hopton. He was known as the miracle of his age, and he died relatively young. I think he was about 25 when he died. But he was a mathematician, and he was the inventor of a theodolite, which is used in surveying. And I believe Dingley was made aware of this, obviously through his grandmother, of this very important person. That he was so important that his work in surveying was actually used in surveying up to the 18th century. So he was a very important individual, and Dingley no doubt was made aware of this. And this is, as I said, this is the reason for me showing this, the family tree and the relationship. Arthur, his name occurs near Dingley's grandparents. That's the relationship there. Just to show you what he did, he published 2 treatises on land surveying, and this is just the cover of one of them. And he also is an inventor of this theodolite. Perhaps Dingley may have had something smaller with him. He seems to, times when he's talking about looking at things in the journal, you often think that maybe he had something like that with him, but he may not have, we don't know. To quote Hopton, the best way to describe Arthur Hopton is that he was a topographer, and his own definition of it is an art whereby we taught to describe any particular place within relation unto the whole, delivering all things of note contained therein, as ports, villages, rivers, not omitting the smallest, also to describe the platform of houses, buildings, monuments, or any such particular thing. And that's exactly what Dingley does. And to perhaps put it into a better context, is a regional field survey, inquiry using a variety of sources, collection of facts, stories, objects, detailed description and or measurement, listing of notable features, visualization in a variety of formats, use of histography, communication of results through presentation and or publication. That is a synopsis of Dingley's manuscript. He encompasses all of these. So Dingley is a choreographer. Now, just to go back, I mentioned that Dingley was sent to London to be educated. On the left-hand side of the slide, there is the playwright James Shirley, and on the right is John Ogilby. Both men had careers in Ireland. James Shirley was over writing plays for the theatre in Dublin in the 1630s when Thomas Wentworth was Lord Deputy, and John Ogilby was closer to the Wentworth family, teaching his daughters to dance. But he was also involved heavily in the theatre, and after he fled to England after the 1641 rebellion, he worked closely with James Shirley. I think James Shirley taught him taught him Greek, and John Ogilby subsequently returned to Ireland to found the theatre again at the Restoration. But I believe Thomas Dingley met both of these men when, well, he definitely met his teacher, James Shirley, but I'm sure he met John Ogilby because he references John Ogilby's translations in his Irish journal. A point worth noting is, although Thomas Dingley left Southampton, his grandmother ensured that his links with Southampton continued on by leaving him property in her will. And I would like to acknowledge the late David Parrott, who was a member of the Church Monument Society, who sadly died a few years ago. He found out this information for me, and anytime I actually think of the Dingley manuscript, David is forever in my thoughts, and he was a lovely man. So why did Dingley come to Ireland? Well, this man here on the left, a portrait of the 7th Earl of Thomond, and his monument is on the right. He lived in Great Billing in Northampton, and he owned large tracts of land in Ireland. His father had fled Ireland in the 1640s due to the rebellion, and his son grew up in England but never came over here, and he got into a lot of trouble for being an absentee landlord, but he just had no interest in coming over to Ireland. But his son Henry, Lord Bracken, did, and he came over on a few occasions to see Ireland, and he must have told his father about it, and all the various people he met, but his father still showed no interest in coming over. Unfortunately, Henry died suddenly in 1678, leaving Henry, the 7th Earl of Thomond, with no representative in Ireland. And obviously with so much land and him being a landlord, there must have been something decided at the time to have a new survey done in Ireland. Now, as I'm going to be mentioning counties, and I know some of you might be familiar with counties in Ireland and others won't be, I decided to put up a map of Ireland highlighting the counties in blue that Dingley visited. Now, he didn't visit all of them, but it'll just give you an idea of the areas he covered. Just to give you an idea of the extensive O'Brien Thomond lands, they owned land in Dublin, Carlow, a little bit of Tipperary, Limerick, and Clare. And that's a huge amount of land that they owned. And this is the lands that Thomas Dingley came over to visit and to survey. The Thomond family have had a history of doing surveys. They did a number in the 17th century, all in the 1630s, as you can see here. And after that, there doesn't seem to have been any. So around 1680, 81, it was decided that 2 surveys were going to be done. We don't know whose idea it was. Maybe it was Lord Bracken, and maybe he started, he put the ball rolling, so to speak, before he died unexpectedly. Or maybe his father decided, well, I've all this money coming into me. I need to know who's out there, and I'm not going to be going over to Ireland, so I'd like someone to do it for me. So the first survey was done by Thomas Spate. Spate lived in Clare. His father was involved in the development of Carlow, which was owned by Thomond. And Dingley actually mentions his father and had great praise for him, mentions him in his manuscript. The Spate survey was accountancy based. As you can see, his first page is so different to the one that Dingley has drawn. And his is very much accountancy based, as I'll show you. These are examples of from his manuscript, which was subsequently sent to O'Brien Thomond. As you can see, very accountancy based, numbers, names, and it's something that obviously O'Brien wanted. Unfortunately, Spate, or should I say, unfortunately for O'Brien, Spate was in a perfect position to commit fraud, and this is what he did. Post 1686, a relative of O'Brien, who was resident in Ireland, became suspicious and demanded or reported back saying this guy better be removed. So he was moved, but he wasn't imprisoned or anything like that. He was just dismissed from his job. Now I'm going to really start talking about manuscript, Dingley's manuscript, but I just wanted to bring something to your attention. If indeed you do decide to have a look at the original and the Royal Society of Antiquaries of Ireland edition, the column or the writing on the left-hand side of the page shows you the layout of the original manuscript, the one that you'll see if you look at the National Libraries online, and that's his journey. But if you look at the Royal Society of Antiquaries one, you'll see how much it has changed. For example, it shows that he seems to indicate he left via Dublin when he actually left via Youghal. There's a lot of things. It's heavily edited, so I wanted to just bring that to your attention in case when you start reading, if you end up looking at the 2 of them, you're wondering what's going on. However, that said, it's well worth reading, and some people might find it a lot more informative than looking at the original manuscript. So now we're going to start talking about the importance of Thomas Dingley's manuscript and for the study of funerary monuments in Ireland. Dingley arrived in Ireland between wars. Ireland, 17th century, was littered with wars. He refers a lot to the recent rebellion of 1641, but he doesn't really mention much about the Cromwellian conquest of the 1650s, possibly because many of the people he met when he was over here were Cromwellians. Dingley himself was a very strong royalist. Post 1660, and with the Restoration, Ireland was at peace, but it still had a standing army, and Dingley notes their presence, the various groups of army people in Ireland when he meets them. Anyway, let's start with the manuscript. Dingley records memorial inscriptions, indicating at times the lettering used. And with the Fitton brass in St. Patrick's Cathedral, you'll see that on the right hand side of the slide, you'll see he's written this is the upper part in black. He's taken note of some of the inscription, but not all of it. He doesn't sketch the brass for some unknown reason, maybe because he was short in time, or as you can see, it is a very elaborate brass, and therefore he decided for whatever reason he wasn't going to record it. Another memorial in which he only records the inscription is the Sir William Bishop monument, very elaborate looking. Unfortunately, it is no longer in existence. The illustration on the right-hand side of the page is from the Chief Herald's office, from a manuscript, another manuscript called Monumenta Blanae. And this, used in conjunction with Dingley, allows you to recreate how the original monument appeared with the inscription. And Dingley notes in saying that the inscriptions were not one was worth note. So he obviously wasn't too impressed with the monument, but he records some of the inscription, but it's not very well written. I've seen better things written on monuments. Another memorial in which he also records the inscription, and this memorial is also no longer in existence. Again, the illustration is taken from the Monumenta Blanae. The person responsible for this manuscript, as I said to you, Chief Herald, they were interested in the form of the monument, but also the heraldry. Now, I note the heraldry is not filled in this one, but in the other illustrations from the manuscript, it is. They were more interested in the heraldry rather than the inscription. And unfortunately, with this one, Thomas Dingley takes note of the inscription. We had no other record of the inscription. Another contribution of Dingley is that he sketches memorials in conjunction with inscriptions. So when he sees a memorial, he will also he'll record the entire thing. And this memorial, it's just a wall plaque. Again, unfortunately, no longer exists. Was formerly in Christchurch Cathedral, Dublin. And the man on the left is Sir Richard Bingham. And the middle part of the slide is filled with the drawing for the Monumenta Blanae. Again, just interested in the heraldry. And then the drawing on the right is Dingley, who records the entire memorial. Another example of where this is done is the, again, unfortunately destroyed monument to the infant son of Sir Arthur Chichester, formerly Lord Deputy of Ireland. It was, the child died aged 3 or either 2 or 3 months old in 1606, but the monument wasn't erected until 1614. I found further documentary evidence about this when I'd actually finished my master's. Again, you can see the difference, the Monumenta Blanae on the left and Dingley's drawing on the right, and it shows that his drawings, sometimes people have often wondered, can they be believed, but in this case anyway, he seems to have captured the original monument. Another example would be the surviving Agard monument dating to 1584 in Christchurch Cathedral, Dublin. Unfortunately, as the heraldry no longer exists, but Dingley draws it, sketches it, and as you can see, it's a good copy of the monument. Another memorial, which unfortunately has been badly ruined, this is where Dingley as a source can be used to, as he records lost details. This is a tomb which commemorates Luke Schallener, which was actually, some of it is in the Trinity College Dublin South Chapel. He was one of the founders of the university and was vice provost. He died in 1613. It is the only sketch that we have of the original monument. It may not be up to much, but at least it gives us some idea of what it looked like. And the reason why the effigy doesn't look too happy is because during restoration work of the chapel, it was moved outside, and the weather, I think it was described as being alabaster, and as we know, alabaster and water don't mix very well, and the effigy now is in storage, and I don't believe it ever is going to be shown out again. And the other thing that Dingley shows, a railing which surrounded the monument. This also has disappeared. The Jones Monument in St. Patrick's Cathedral, Dublin. On the left, you can see what it looks like now, and on the right, you can see Dingley's drawing, and you can see various parts of the monument have disappeared. Obelisks, you see the little decoration of military implements at the base. They're very worn. Some of the effigies have disappeared or have been moved around, and this always happens in cathedrals, restoration works and whatever over the years, and unfortunately this damage happens, and we don't know anything about it. So people often accuse various rebellions and say, well, this happened and that happened. It could have just happened during restoration, and so no one, so the church authorities, I suppose, are to blame. The Boyle Monument in the same cathedral was erected by Sir Richard Boyle, 1st Earl of Cork. This monument has undergone a lot of restoration. It was repainted around 2000. No, I think it was in the early 1990s. And it was a tomb that was famously moved by Wentworth when he was Lord Deputy. Actually, Laud wanted it to be moved, and Wentworth didn't get on well with Cork or Boyle, so he got it moved. But as you can see, the heraldic details are missing, as are some of the allegorical figures, and two of the daughters, as you can see at the bottom part of the lower level, the effigies have also gone missing. So as you can see, Dingley drew this by 1680-81 when he's over, so all of this damage has happened in the interim. Now, to leave Dublin, when Dingley was leaving Ireland, he stayed in Youghal, and he visited St. Mary's Church down there, and he did some wonderful sketches in the church. And again, this is a monument to William Llewellyn, who was alderman of Youghal and twice mayor. And unfortunately, the monument on the left, part of it exists. I don't know if the kneeling effigy has probably from another monument, but it just shows you the detail Dingley gives. Obviously whatever the stone used was veined. I believe the coat of arms that survives the heraldry is probably alabaster. It's a long time since I've been down there, but some sumptuous stonework was used, and perhaps Dingley is reflecting this. Another memorial which he sketches is the Piers Mee monument, and he was alderman in 1633. Now, this is where you, when you look at Dingley's drawing, obviously the railing is gone, and some of the figures are shown probably a bit more elaborate than they are originally. But interestingly, the front of the tomb actually has, unfortunately my photograph doesn't capture it, has a skeleton in where the rings are, and Dingley doesn't record that. I don't know why. Perhaps he did notice it. Maybe he was more interested in the other parts of the monument. But it's at the end of the day, Dingley was only human, and the occasional mistake, whatever, was made. Dingley also visited Carrick-on-Lish, and this tomb is exposed to the elements now, has been for many years, but again, it just gives you an idea of what it would have originally looked like. And again, you can kind of see how accurate Dingley's drawings are, and it's as I said, it's great to have them in this respect, particularly when a monument like this, I know local people try to conserve it and are very try their best, but when you're dealing with a monument and a ruin, it is very difficult to preserve it for future generations. Dingley also records the names of sculptors, and this memorial, which you probably saw in the ad for the paper, is in, well, I don't think it exists anymore. It was in Tullow in County Carlow. I attach later drawings or later recordings of it by the Society for the Preservation of the Memorials of the Dead. Pretty long word, but the MEMS Dead Society, they went around recording memorials in the 19th and 20th centuries, and there's a rubbing of the memorial which kind of gives you some idea of how accurate or not Dingley was. And the mason who recorded it was, I can't remember his name now, but anyway, he records it. The next memorial that Dingley records, the maker, you see Patricius Kieran. This memorial is in Abington, County Limerick, and Dingley spent a long time here, and I'm going to show you a few more memorials that he sketched here. Excuse the photograph, it's badly pixelated, but I used it to show that the monument was in a better state of preservation in 1907 than it is now. A lot of stone has disappeared from it, and it is in a very, it's not an easily accessible place. But you can see that Dingley really spent a lot of time at this site, and it's fantastic to have his recording, because the monument, as you can see, is in a pretty bad state of preservation. Dingley also records a bridge plaque that Patrick made as well, and I've the photograph of it now. You wouldn't know, you'd pass it by, you wouldn't think it was ever written. There's a tiny bit of raised lettering on it, but it's on a situation on a bridge which is still used, and it's very difficult to actually look at it when there's cars flying back and forth. But as you can see, it's pretty bad. Another memorial that I'm thankful that Dingley recorded is the Maurice Hurley monument at Emily Cathedral, a site which has been rebuilt at least twice, and this has resulted in the monument being left in two pieces built into the surrounding wall. Dingley notes that Patrick Kieran and Nicholas Cowley were the sculptors, and if it hadn't been for him, I wouldn't have even looked at this monument, but at least it's another one that we know that they're responsible for. Again, this memorial would have been very big, not unlike the Walsh tomb at Abington, very big monument. To return to Youghal, the second Boyle monument to feature in my paper, this has been largely left alone. It possibly has its original railing around it. The fact that it hasn't been kind of, how would I say, it's in a better condition is because the descendants of the Boyles, the Dukes of Devonshire, spent a lot of time in Lismore, so they were probably looking after the tomb. But also you have the community as well, that the collection of memorials in St. Mary's, they are looked after well, and this memorial again shows you Dingley recording. He notes in his manuscript that Alexander Hills was responsible for the monument. I'm just going to go back to Abington. Unfortunately, a lot of the tombs that Dingley sketches are no longer exist, and this is one of the tombs. I've been down back to the site a few times, and I haven't seen any evidence of it. So that no longer exists. Another memorial at the same site to the Barry family. Part of it was still around in probably the early part of the 20th century, where this drawing was made, but I've been to the site and I can't find it. So it's unfortunate, it's another destroyed monument, but at least we have Thomas Dingley's sketches. I know up to now I've shown a lot of early modern memorials, and some of you who might be medievalists saying, well, where are some medieval monuments? Well, he does sketch a few of them. The one in this slide that I want to bring your attention to is to Bishop O'Dea. He was Bishop of Limerick between 1400 and 1426, and he died in 1434. This illustration by Dingley shows him on a new base, altar tomb base, which was made by the Thomond O'Briens when they were erecting their own memorial in St. Mary's Cathedral, Limerick. So they had to move his memorial, and there's been a few papers published on that. Anyway, his tomb was a focus of ritual activity for Catholics in Limerick. And the later English visitor, Loveday, who visited the cathedral in 1732, noted that people were constantly cutting pieces off for treatment of the bloody flux. He also notes at the time that the cathedral was in a bad state and the monument could well have been suffering from damp. It has been described as being of alabaster, and if that was the case, and the dampness of the building would have enabled people to take parts off the monument more easily. And it's probably the first time that I've heard of a monument that has been devoured by humans. It no longer exists today. Another earlier monument, again, I mentioned Emly Cathedral. This was a monument to the Pillins family. Again, no longer exists, and this is the only sketch that we have by Thomas Dingley. Another memorial from Milltown Abbey. The ruins of this abbey don't even exist anymore, and this is the Morans family. This tomb is not unlike another monument which still exists, which Dingley didn't sketch in Holy Cross Abbey, County Tipperary. I'm just using it because it just reminds me of it. Now, when you're looking at the Dingley manuscript, one monument you won't see in it. You'll notice there's a page missing in the vicinity of his account of St. Mary's Cathedral in Limerick. And the reason for this gap is because Dingley appears to have taken, well, I believe he took the drawing that he made of the O'Brien tomb and put it in his Welsh tour. And the reason for this is because there was a marriage alliance between the Beauforts and the O'Brien family. And at this stage, it would appear that Dingley, if he removed it and was, treating the manuscript in that manner, that it wasn't going to be ever sent to the O'Brien family or the 7th Earl. And the reason perhaps for this was because O'Brien probably had enough problems with the earlier with Speight's doing him out of so much money that having to pay Dingley for something was probably out of the question. But he may have remained on good terms with Dingley and recommended him to record Beaufort's tour of Wales. And by doing this, Dingley incorporates the O'Brien tomb into the Welsh manuscript as a sort of a thank you, but also more importantly to show the marriage connection between the two families. At the end of the day, after looking at all these drawings, how do you see Dingley? What was he? Well, this quote, which is often quoted about Dingley, I think sums him up as being an antiquarian, someone who was very concerned about monuments. He certainly drew an awful lot of them, so it certainly points in that direction, heavily suggests it. But certainly this statement does. And if you actually read Weaver, you'll notice in his address to the reader, something very similar is written. Dingley just takes it and changes it around, but what he's saying, he's just repeating what John Weaver has said. And Dingley does refer to Weaver on occasion, very say lovingly, as in he appreciates his work. So I have no doubt that Dingley sees himself as in the same vein as John Weaver. I I'm going to end this talk with an interesting piece of information I found in the Folger MS, which I mentioned to you earlier on. Without a diary, we don't know how people perceive themselves, and most of the time we have to look at what people say about them and history. So we really don't know. But the Folger manuscript has a poem written about Dingley by Martin Johnston, who was vicar of Dilwyn. He sums him up. He was a cornet. He doesn't mention Gray's Inn, which Dingley actually attended, although the same manuscript does refer to Dingley elsewhere as being of Gray's Inn. The transcription, by the way, was made by Professor Thomas Heron. I had actually done it, but I didn't catch all what was being written, because I found some of the writing a bit difficult. But if you just read through the poem, you'll see what his friend describes him as. Certainly, he is interested in looking at monuments, and he's obviously does a lot of walking, but I would think he was probably on a horse going around Ireland. But ultimately, it is the last verse in the poem, which I suppose anybody who's familiar with Dingley, they always talk about his drawings and his sketches, and that is ultimately what his friend saw him as being somebody who was good at sketching, and this we're fortunate that so many of them have survived for us to appreciate today. Thank you.